A 3-week series. We started 2 weeks ago with the first installment of Faithful Finances, and then we took a break for the annual meeting and did some important business of the church last week, which included financial reports. And today we're returning to the question and the issue of faithful finances. Dan, that microphone is really hot right now, and I have been told that you are good enough to adjust it slightly. So I wonder if you might adjust that microphone down slightly, and if it gets too quiet, I'll let you know. But thank you, Dan, for that. Let's start with a prayer, and at the top of the handout, it's also at the top of the screen. I found this prayer in the back of the prayer book. I'm still finding prayers in the back of the prayer book, and I've been doing this for a little while now. But let's pray this prayer. It's a prayer entitled, "For Joy in God's Creation." Let's pray this prayer together. Dan, that sounds great. Thank you. O Heavenly Father, who has filled the world with beauty, open our eyes to behold your gracious hand in all your works, that, rejoicing in your whole creation, we may learn to serve you with gladness for the sake of him through whom all things were made, your Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Would somebody be willing to run the microphone around the room for us? Dean, thank you. I appreciate that. And if you're new to our class, we're glad you're here. And keep in mind that people at home are watching online, and they will not be able to hear you unless you use the microphone, no matter how loudly you yell. I promise that Evelyn Elledge, who's likely watching online, won't be able to hear you, and she wants to hear you. Before we continue, let me say a word about the origin of this series. And you've heard a little bit about it, or you've read a little bit about it in the newsletter. So back in November, the vestry was looking at our operating numbers, the income that we received, the expenses that were going out. And we noticed that although expenses had been below budget, we'd been really careful with what we've spent, like income was also below budget. So we know that December is a big month in the life of the church. Last year we got 19% of our income in the month of December, which is a significant amount. So we knew that December would be good, but we still anticipated that we would finish 2023 break even, or maybe even a little worse than break even, a little bit of a deficit. So that was piece number one. Piece number two is we recognize that there are some really big building and maintenance expenses that are ahead of us in the current year. Namely, the air conditioning unit, which provides air conditioning for Jack's office, the conference room, the choir room, the bathrooms outside the choir room, Dan and Megan's office, the lower green room, and the hallway there, which is a lot of space, which the last time it was installed was back in the 60s. That unit had lasted us since the 60s. Well, it went out, and because of a system that big, we expected that would probably be about $150,000. That's just kind of a guess, just to replace an air conditioning unit. So given that we were going to end last year likely close to break even, and given that we expected a much larger than normal expense in the current year, we scheduled this class expecting that I would be saying to you, we have to find money to do what we need to do. However, as perhaps you heard last week at the annual meeting, and maybe in the class the week before, St. Paul's was even more generous than we expected it to be at the end of last year, which allowed us to set aside a little bit of money from 2023 to do that big maintenance project in 2024. And so because of your generosity in 2023, and because of your generosity again in 2024, we're not facing that shortfall, that unmet need, at least not in that urgent way. So originally, this class was for the vestry and me to say to you, what are we going to do about this? Like, where are we going to find $100,000 extra to make this necessary improvement? Well, the budget seems like it's going to take care of that, at least that part. So instead of doing that, let me show you how we use your money and why we're making this appeal. Instead, we have the opportunity to dream a little bit. And I'm, as you might guess, more excited about dreaming a little bit than trying to convince you that we need more. Because that doesn't sound like faithful stewardship. That sounds like a theology of scarcity rather than abundance. So I'm really glad to be able to lean into that abundance. It's a wonderful reminder. So today, instead of asking you to help us figure out what we're going to do about that. I'm going to ask you to figure out what we might do next. And so we're going to spend a little time reading the Bible. We'll spend a little time talking about the St. Paul's budget in terms of what values it represents and how we might, as a church, continue to shift and shape that in ways that reflect our values more clearly. And then lastly, we're going to dream about some major capital improvements to our facility. And we'll sort of try to prioritize those in an interactive way. That's what I hope to do today. And we won't hold you to it. It'll just be a fun to dream together. But let's start with Scripture. And I've got a rather long passage of Scripture for us to read. And I wonder if we might split it in half. Would somebody read for us, please, Luke 19, verses 1 through 10. And then after that, would somebody pick up with verses 11 through 28? Who would read 1 through 10 for us? Thank you. Susie's going to read 1 through 10. Mandy, since you're sitting right there, would you pick up, please, with verse 11 and read the rest? Thank you so much. That's so kind. You've been voluntold. I appreciate that. All right, Susie and then Mandy. And that's Jesus, by the way. Yeah, the he. Yeah.
The he is Jesus, is what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
He entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, "He has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost."
Thank you.
As they were listening to this, he went on to tell a parable, because he was near Jerusalem, and because they supposed that the kingdom of God was to appear immediately. So he said, "A nobleman went to a distant country to get royal power for himself and then returned. He summoned 10 of his slaves and gave them 10 pounds and said to them, 'Do business with these until I come back.' But the citizens of the country hated him, and he sent a delegation after him, saying, 'We do not want this man to rule over us.' When he returned, having received royal power, he ordered these slaves to whom he had given the money to be summoned so they might find out what they had gained by trading. The first came forward and said, 'Lord, your pound has made 10 more pounds.' He said to him, 'Well done, good slave. Because you have been trustworthy in a very small thing, take charge of 10 cities. Then the second came saying, 'Lord, your pound has made 5 pounds.' He said to him, 'And you rule over 5 cities.' Then the other came saying, 'Lord, here is your pound. I wrapped it up in a piece of cloth, for I was afraid of you, because you are a harsh man. You take what you did not deposit and reap what you did not sow.' He said to him, 'I will judge you by your own words, you wicked slave. You knew, did you, that I was a harsh man, taking what I did not deposit and reaping what I did not sow? Why then did you not put my money into the bank? Then, when I returned, I could have collected it with interest.' He said to the bystanders, 'Take the pound from him and give it to the one who has 10 pounds. And they said to him, 'Lord, he has 10 pounds. I tell you, to all of those who have more will be given, but for those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. But as far as these enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and slaughter them in my presence.' After this, he said this. He went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem."
Thank you. So let's set aside the parable of the pounds for now. We'll come back to that. Let's start with Zacchaeus. I think we like the story of Zacchaeus. I don't think we like the parable of the pounds, so we're going to hold off on that for a little bit. Let's start with the first part. Let's start with the story of Zacchaeus. And my question for you is, what does Zacchaeus teach us about faithfulness? What do we learn about being faithful from the story of Zacchaeus? Does everybody remember the song from Sunday school? Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he, right? Yep, so we learned that people who are short in stature can be disciples, but that's not the point. What's the point? I mean, what do we learn? What do we learn about being faithful from Zacchaeus? Another way to ask the same question is, why do you think Luke included this story in his gospel account? Mark doesn't include it. Matthew doesn't include it. John doesn't include it. Luke, why do you think Luke liked this story? Why do you think Luke included it? Sarah, right in the middle.
Well, I'm actually exploring the translation of short. Like he was short, not in stature, but short in what he was giving.
Yeah.
And small in his contributions.
Yeah.
So I've always thought maybe he was just not measuring up in other ways. And
Yeah.
shortness is, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's really, there's a lot to imagine in this story, right? You know, it's almost like well, of course, like a really great storyteller has pieced this together and included his stature and the sycamore tree, which are almost incidental to the point of the narrative, but of course they're not, right? I mean, yeah. What else? What else do you notice? What does this story tell us about faithfulness, about Jesus? What do you feel drawn into? What is it about this story that you celebrate? What is it about the story that gives you pause? Yeah. Say more about Zacchaeus. Yeah, up front with Ray, and then to the back with Mandy.
Well, in the King James Bible, it's, I do give half my goods to the poor, and I restore him fourfold. It's present tense, but in this New Revised Standard, it's future tense. So I'm wondering, did he have a change of heart after Jesus talked to him, or was he always a good guy?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the question's open. I didn't do any exegetical work to tell you what tense those are. And I don't know a lot about Luke to tell you, but it wouldn't surprise me if it were aorist. But I don't know. Anyway, yeah.
I was just going to say that he was a tax collector, and so during that time, he would have been considered a taker and an outcast of the crowd.
Yeah.
And so I think that Luke includes him in the book of Luke because the outcast and the takers are still the ones that God is there for them too, and that Jesus welcomed the outcast and the taker.
Yeah.
And also that Zacchaeus was seeking him. And so it shows that someone that's a taker, it's a reminder to the people that are already givers that takers too need Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think we can tell from the story that Zacchaeus is he's not held in high esteem by his peers. We know tax collector is a bad thing. I think we underestimate how bad the word rich would have sounded in that time, right? I want you to imagine being a part of a communal society where everybody is barely getting by, right? And the kind of society the kind of community where if you got a little something extra, you would have to share it with those around you because you might need their generosity in a little while. And just imagine what it's like to be a part of a community where the what's mine and what's yours is a lot blurrier. And then sort of imagine like somebody joining that community who was rich, like rich. There's nothing good about that. And to be a rich tax collector, that's not good. That's not a good thing. That's as ungodly as we can imagine. I try to, even as even Mandy, as you were describing him as an outcast, I wondered, like, who is the person? I don't need a name, but what person, if they came to church at St. Paul's, would we say, I don't think that person belongs here. I don't think Evan, you need to tell that person to leave. We can't allow that person to be here. Like, just imagine with me who that would be. Like, what kind of selfish, what kind of oppressive, predatory lending practices? Like what, the kind of person that, that we would say that person doesn't belong here, right? You know, like that's it. I don't know who it is, but but that's exactly who is seeking Jesus and whom Jesus seems to seek out as well. Yeah. All right. What else? That's enough of me. What else do you learn from Zacchaeus? What does Zacchaeus teach you about being faithful? Yeah, Ray.
Well, there is kind of a salvation by works theme here. I mean, today salvation has come to this house, but that's because he's either has done or is promising to do good things, giving to the poor and paying back 4 times as much.
Yeah. I think the response that I would offer is, is Zacchaeus' generosity and commitment to doing justice prescriptive or descriptive, right? I think the average hearer of this text fails to anticipate what Zacchaeus says. I don't think you can describe a rich man, Zacchaeus, who climbs up a sycamore tree, who hears the grumbling. He's used to hearing the grumbling. No one has said anything nice about him since he was 12. Right? I mean, like even his mama doesn't talk to him. Right? I mean, like that's how bad Zacchaeus is. So nobody hears what's coming, which is, and you raised the question about verb tense, which I think is another exploration. Like he gives half of his possessions to the poor and pays back 4 times as much, which is more than what would be asked of anyone, right? More than what would be asked of anyone. So I wonder, maybe what Zacchaeus teaches me about faithfulness is, it makes me want to ask, how can I see Zacchaeus' surprising generosity as evidence of discipleship, faithfulness, belonging to the kingdom? Like, what's the relationship between his giving? Because I don't think we would not say you got to give a lot in order to be faithful. Not that case. But in this case, there's something about the undoing of the prejudice or what's expected of what we expect of him that is possible. Yeah, Shannon, and then back to Tammy.
Well, this may relate to the tense part, but I think Zacchaeus admitting to Jesus that he does make these contributions, but that whole notion of give in secret, I mean, the public sees him as a tax collector and a bad guy, so maybe they're not aware that he is so generous, and they've judged him unfairly, but being honest with Jesus about his giving, because he's doing it unbeknownst to the people.
Yeah, which you invite me to wonder, is he kind of giving Jesus permission to come to his house? Is part of what he's saying, look, like, don't listen to them. They don't know this, but actually I'm faithful. It's okay for you to come to my house. I'm not as big a sinner as they make me out to be, Rabbi. It won't be that. Maybe, I don't know. Tammy, and then Trent, and then up to Ray.
What I see is maybe it's regardless of his giving. Maybe it is because of his giving in secret. But in public, before he goes to Zacchaeus' house, he lets the crowd know that today salvation has come to Zacchaeus because he too is a son of Abraham, just like all the rest of them.
Yes.
Just like all the rest of them.
Just like the rest. Yes, for sure. Yeah, and that's been a phrase for Luke for a while at this point, right? when he heals the bent over woman, he says she too is a daughter of Abraham, right? That's an important, like his naming for the community, the one who is assumed to not belong is one who does belong, is kind of how Luke talks about that. Yeah, Trent.
Yeah, so you mentioned, you used an interesting word, the undoing of our expectations or of the crowds. I kind of look at it also as an undoing of Zacchaeus. I mean, he's acting in a very odd way for someone as you kind of portrayed him.
Yeah,
To be climbing up a tree,
Yeah.
to be interested. It's almost like who he was is, to a certain degree, been undone
yeah.
by this encounter.
Yeah, so let me follow up and ask, if Jesus didn't see him, and Jesus didn't have this exchange with him, and he doesn't say, I give half my possessions, if all we had was Zacchaeus, the rich tax collector, climbs up a tree to see Jesus, period, what story might we tell about this strange man who given his status, his wealth, has no business climbing up a tree, and yet what's going on in his world? What's going on in his life that he would care enough to see Jesus to climb up in a tree? Or in what esteem is he held in order that he wouldn't care about? So anyway, I think there's lots of layers. And I wonder if actually I give half my possessions to the poor and I pay back 4 times as much is actually, like by the time we get to that story, we should be able to see that. Yeah, yeah. Ray, did you want to follow up? Yeah, Ray, and then Sarah, and then Jonathan. We're not going to get to the pounds, and I appreciate that. Y'all are trying to avoid it. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, Ray, and then Sarah, and then Jonathan.
Well, I don't think he's giving in secret because you started out by saying this is a very small, tight community. I think that's probably accurate. I think if he was giving things, they'd know, and they
Yeah.
wouldn't be so mad
Yeah.
at him or so disgusted with him. I have a question. Is Zacchaeus a Semitic name? Is this guy a Gentile carpetbagger, or is he a Jewish
He's
comprador fellow traveler?
He's Jewish.
Okay.
Yeah. But as a tax collector, right, he's aligned himself with the empire
Yes, yes.
rather than the synagogue, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just think climate, he's unpopular. Nobody makes way for him.
Yeah.
Okay, even though he's rich and powerful, they kind of,
Yeah.
it's kind of a fluid situation, so nobody defers to him. And climbing up in a tree does seem to abandon his previous high social status.
Yeah.
Jesus is calling him out because Jesus sees from his conduct that something's different about him. He wants
Yeah.
to make a change in
Yeah.
his life.
Yeah, thank you. As the microphone goes back to Sarah, I'll say every once in a while I'll get a call about a wedding. We don't do weddings at St. Paul's except for members or children and grandchildren of members. Like, we could be a lovely wedding venue, but I don't have time to do weddings, right? It's a pain. But every once in a while I'll get a call from someone who says something like, I'm a person of faith, faith matters to me, but my faith tradition won't allow me to marry the person I love for various reasons. Can you help me? And in that situation, if they're willing to climb up that tree and kind of say, but this still matters to me, then my heart softens in that way. So I do think there's something powerful about Jesus seeing this person and knowing, not just because he's Jesus, but seeing and recognizing something's going on there. Yeah. Sarah, and then Jonathan, and then we're going to move on. Yep.
It's really building on what he was saying, that Jesus has inspired this reconnection with self, almost his childlike ways, and that he climbs up a tree like he would have when he was 12. And so then he's more likely to then open himself to the community, to giving, to doing these things that are outside what his status quo parameters are.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to respond to that in a minute. But yeah, Jonathan, raise your hand again. Thank you. Yep.
Something that Trent said really sparked in me. The story that directly precedes this is the rich young ruler, who is the guy's like, I do everything right, I know the law, and then Jesus goes, okay, well then do this thing, and he goes, well, I can't do that. He goes away very sad, and so we would expect him to do the right thing, and he doesn't. And then we get Zacchaeus, who's a collaborator with the empire, and Jesus says, come down from the tree, and he goes, I'm doing everything. And it's like, maybe he heard the story of the other dude, and it's like, oh, I gotta meet this guy.
Yeah.
I got to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I think I'm not going to answer it, and I'm not going to take a poll, but the questions for you to ask are, when did Zacchaeus decide to give his money away? Was it before he climbed up the tree? Was it when Jesus called him down? right? So that's the other question is, when did salvation come to his house? Before he climbed up the tree, when he climbed up the tree and Jesus saw him, when he made the statement about giving, or is it just Jesus? Is Jesus just sort of saying, I came to his house today? So just take that away. I think there's a lot of room there. All right, so the question that I'm going to build on what Jonathan does is, so why does Luke put the story of the pounds, which is, they're called talents in Matthew and Mark's version, and it's a little less complicated in Matthew and Mark's version, but why do you think Luke puts the parable of the pounds here with the story of Zacchaeus? He gives us what I think is an inadequate editorial explanation, which is, because he was near to Jerusalem and because they supposed that the kingdom of God was to appear immediately. I think that's a little careless stitching together. I think that seam is a little rough. My question, though, is, so why are these next to each other? Another way to ask that is, what's the relationship for us between the questions we would ask about Zacchaeus and the questions that we ask because of this haunting parable of the pounds? Why do they go together? Why does Luke stitch them together? And I don't think the answer is because they happened that way. Like I don't remember for sure, but I don't think Luke, Matthew, and Mark have this happening at exactly the same chronological moment in the ministry of Jesus. I could be wrong about that. I don't think it's an accident that Luke puts Zacchaeus and pounds next to each other. Why, is my question. Thoughts about that? I don't have an answer, so there's no judgment here. This is like I'm looking for any creative insights that you would give me. Like, what's the connection? Yeah, Dean.
Just riffing here, but I think that with Zacchaeus, there shows a responsibility that more people that possess more should be giving more. You know, it's not a basis of percentages. You should be able to, lack of a better word, Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
And then he stitches this next one together because you also need to strive to, whatever that may be, is work towards something, whether it be how the nobleman told him to, take the pounds and make more, or whatever you see your talents are, that you have a duty to grow those talents and explore them further.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. It makes me wonder, though, whether is the parable of the pounds, so of whom is the parable of the pounds critical? Like the way it's presented to us, it feels like it's critical of those who are grumbling about Zacchaeus. But I don't know that that's true, because in the story, nobody likes the ruler, and surely someone who goes away and to get power for himself is not a hero in Luke's gospel account, and yet I don't know what to make of it. It's a mess. Yeah, thank you. What else? Ray up front? Yep. Here comes that mic. Yeah, so why? Yeah.
Well, it might be a parable about the Jewish establishment. Maybe the ruler who's going away to get royal power is Jesus on his way to get crucified and then resurrected. And then at the end, we have he's going to slaughter those people who didn't want him to be king over them. And perhaps the wicked slave is the one who held back and wouldn't share the word of salvation with the Gentiles, but just wrapped it up in a cloth where it couldn't appreciate.
I missed the feast of Jesus the Slaughterer, right? Maybe. Yeah, I think when we hear the story of the parable of the talents in the other accounts, I think it's really helpful for us to remember that just because the authority figure in the parable doesn't always mean God, it doesn't mean that God is the ruler who goes away. I don't think it means that Jesus is the ruler who goes away, but I think it's a fair question in reading. To what extent are we supposed to identify the ruler as Jesus? If the point of the parable of the talents, the other versions, is be faithful with what you've been given. Right? Judgment is based on, will you use what you've been given to the glory of God? The word talent, our English word talent comes from the parable. Like it's not an accident that they both say talents. Like we learned the Bible well enough to say this measure of weight, a talent, we're going to call that a gift, a skill, right? You know, like, that's really funny. To me, it's funny. Anyway, so the parable, the talents, Luke changes it to minas, or in this translation, pounds. But if the parable of the talents is primarily interpreted, I'm not saying it's the right way, but if people primarily interpret it as a lesson of use what God has given you to the glory of God instead of burying it in the ground, all right, that's something I think we can hold on to, then Luke is likewise critical of the one who hides it and doesn't use it out of fear, right? That's similar, and praises the one who makes something of it. The problem is, in Luke's parable, the leader is not a good person. Nobody likes that person at the beginning or at the end, right? So how's that related to Zacchaeus? Yeah, anyway, yeah, Mandy. Mandy's going to solve it all for us, and I'm so grateful. No, she's not. I'm setting her up. But yeah. And then we'll move on. Yeah.
No. How it relates to Zacchaeus is because he took what he had and he gave it to the glory of God. Jesus had an impact on him. And because of that impact, what he had, he gave. And it was to the glory of God.
Yeah.
And so I think that's how it...
Yeah, and maybe, you're helping me figure this, and maybe the crowd assumes tax collector equals bad, end of story. Belongs to the empire, bad. So it doesn't matter what he does, he's bad. I wonder if part of what Jesus is inviting us to see is that even wicked rulers can teach us a lesson worth holding on to. Not for evil sense, but for good sense. Like, you know those stories or there's illustrations that use that they make good stories, right? Like Breaking Bad. Anybody watch Breaking Bad, the series Breaking Bad? Anyway. Like there's nobody worth liking in that story, but you kind of get compelled by these wicked people, and so sometimes even evil characters teach us something godly, maybe in ways that it would be easy to write them off. But maybe not. Yeah. Sarah, and then we'll move on. Yeah, Sarah.
Also, this is like speaking to your audience. Like this is a group of people who are very used to noblemen who oppress you and they're afraid of. So that's very relatable. And I think that nobleman is just the kind of this entity. And then, to me that it's more about the message of what you can do despite this yucky nobleman who's oppressing you as like always.
Yeah, using a familiar image in a surprising way. Yeah, for sure. All right. I want to suggest that the vestry doesn't worry about being slaughtered for not being faithful to God. And yet, this kind of faithfulness, this kind of vision of using the resources entrusted to us to do the work that God has called us to do is absolutely at the heart of what the vestry is thinking about and praying about when we discuss a budget, when we adopt a budget, when we equip the staff and volunteers to use those resources. So let me ask you, hopefully you've got a pencil on your table. There are extra pencils and handouts by the coffee pots. I'm going to give you the answers, but first, I want you to fill out, these are the general categories of our budget: outreach, formation, parish life, worship, clergy, admin, and properties. If you know the answers, then bully for you. You can find them on the website. But I'm curious, if you were making an ideal budget, your St. Paul's budget, with no other information than what you've brought into the room, what percentage of our resources would you devote to outreach, formation, which is children, youth, adults, nursery care, and the like, parish life, which is pastoral care, breakfasts and dinners, fellowship, that kind of picnics, that sort of thing, worship, which is worship, music, and the like, clergy, which we get our own category, but really we're a little bit outreach, we're a little bit parish life, we're a little bit worship, so just clergy, admin, which is supplies, subscriptions, copiers, and the like, financial expenses like financial transactions and properties, which is buildings and grounds. I want you to go through and I want you to fill out the first two columns, your ideal budget, and then what you think it really is. And I'm going to give you a minute to do that, and then I'm going to tell you what it really, really is, and then we'll note the differences. And if you need handouts to do that, We got pencils. Anybody need a handout or a pencil? Are we good? All right. All right. Yeah. So take a minute and think about that, and then we'll look at what we got. We're not going to take up your papers and grade them. So, yeah. But I do think that the spirit of our conversation will inform not only me, but also vestry. So, take a minute. Each column should add up to 100. You can make it add up to 150, but you'll be disappointed when you hear the results. If you finish early and you have a smart device, either a tablet or a smartphone, I'll invite you to go ahead and go to menti.com and enter that code, because the next thing we're going to do is an interactive. We've done it before in this setting. It's been about a year and a half, but where I can see your responses in real time. So if you finish early, you can go to menti.com. If you don't have a smart device, don't worry, you'll still be able to participate. All right. If I gave you 2 more minutes, would that be okay? 2 minutes. And if you're watching at home, you can also go to menti, menti.com, and the code will be easier to see in just a moment. It's at the bottom of the screen, but if you can't read it, I'll give it to you in a moment. All right? So let me tell you what the actual numbers are in the budget. If you want to write them in that last column, you certainly can. What I'm curious is how they compare with the other 2 columns that you've given. All right, in 2024, our budget allocates 12% to outreach, 10% to formation, 7% to parish life, 12% to worship, 18% to clergy, 16% to administration, and 26% to buildings and grounds. Now that adds up to 101 because of rounding errors, but it's as good as it's going to get, right? All right. So let me just pause for a moment and let me ask, was there any number that surprised you or that you found was wildly different from either your expectations or your hopes? Anything that you want to name? Yeah, Shannon Mitchell, do you want to share with us what it is? Hold on just a second. Yep, here it comes.
I put clergy at a lot more than that in my guess, just because that's, salaries are a big cost.
Yeah. Clergy are expensive. Thankfully, I think, St. Paul's has 2 full-time priests and a couple of really part-time priests, but most of our staff fall into other categories, right? Because formation includes our formation salaries, worship includes our music salaries, administration includes our administrative salaries. So, but fair point. Yep, fair point. I'm always glad when someone says, I thought we paid you even more than that. So anyway, thank you. What else? What else caught your eye or surprised you? Anything else surprise you? Yeah, Ray. Here comes that microphone. Dean's getting his steps in today, and I'm grateful. Yeah.
I was here last week and seemed to remember the pie chart. I was surprised at how much was devoted to properties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And my ideal would be 14.3% to each one.
Really? Interesting.
Because they're all important.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I appreciate that. That's gracious. Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that kind of open perspective. Yeah, part of the reason properties is so expensive is because of that really large maintenance expense that we're expecting, but also because of loans on the Bassett building, loans on the property that we have. 2 years ago, it was a lot cheaper than it is now. But yeah, we spent a lot of money on interest on that loan. Yeah. Yeah. What else caught your attention? Yeah, Sarah.
I was pretty aligned on most things, but for worship, I was half of what is actual, and maybe I don't understand what goes into the worship piece.
Yeah, probably the biggest expense are salaries, right? So that's Jack and Carol Nave, and also we pay some of our choir people for that. The music budget itself is pretty expensive in terms of organ upkeep, guests, instrumentalists, the purchase of actual music itself. Yeah, the altar guild budget is pretty small. The candles budget is bigger than you would expect. Candles are expensive, and we go through a lot of them. I think we might spend about $2,500 a year on candles, which is nuts, but it is what it is. Yeah, so that's one. I'll tell you, speaking of properties and worship, last year, the properties number, I don't have it in front of me, but was significantly less. It's primarily because of the air conditioning that needs to be fixed. The line within properties for building maintenance, just building maintenance, the budget was $50,000 last year. This year it's over $100,000. So that's a huge, that bumps that number and of course relatively decreases all the rest. Let me invite you to think about something as we go on to the next piece. Every single one of those categories, every single one of them is about exploring and celebrating God's infinite grace, acceptance, and love. Another way to say that is we are forming disciples of Jesus who will do that work. And if somebody were to say, shouldn't we just sell everything and give it to the poor? That is an absolutely laudable goal, but who's going to teach the next generation of children to give what they have to the poor? Who's going to help people see that those who are unhoused are just as valuable and important to God as you are? And how will we recognize the one who loves them the same if we're not worshiping, if we're not being formed in that way, if we're not spending time together that way? So in some ways you could argue that everything is outreach, everything is pastoral care, everything is worship. So I think all that we do is about helping us celebrate and explore God's infinite grace and acceptance and love. And those things aren't in competition with each other, right? What we give for Children's Church is surely about helping our children know what it means to follow Jesus, the one who cares for all equally. Trent, what would you share?
Yeah, so I know when we have the ministry fair, we represent ways in which St. Paul's is in ministry.
Yes.
But it doesn't capture the way the members of St. Paul's are in ministry outside of St. Paul's.
Sure.
By the same token, the number for outreach captures ways in which St. Paul's perhaps spends money on outreach, but it doesn't capture the way people who have been touched by St. Paul's give outreach.
Yeah.
And I would add to that, if we have this idea that all the outreach giving we're doing is through our tithe, I think we're limiting our vision.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's about our heart, our voice, our time, our talent, our hard work. Yeah. All right. We don't have much time left, but this is the fun part. So go to Menti.com. If you've got a smart device, go to Menti.com and enter the code that you see on the screen. Hold on a second. That you see on the screen now. It's 754691. If you like QR codes, you can also open the camera app on your phone, hold it over that QR code. It should take you to a link, but the code is 754691. 754691. So if you're at home on an iPad or if you've got a phone, go to Menti.com or look at the QR code 754691. If you don't have a smart device, just listen and participate virtually. May I leave that screen? I'll give you, I see phones out, so we'll wait here for a minute longer. Hold on a second. Did you get there? Yeah. All right. Menti, M-E-N-T-I, Menti.com. All right, so I want you to answer two questions. All right. I anticipated that we would have a thermometer in the parish hall or in the welcome center to try to figure out how we're going to pay for HVAC upgrade that needs to happen. Well, the good news is it's in the budget, so we have to do that. So instead of me having a thermometer asking for extra giving, I get to ask you if you were going to make a thermometer. All right, I want you to imagine a big thermometer, and if we reach this level, we get to do that, and if we reach this level, we get to do that. So if you were going to prioritize this list, it's on your smart device if you've got one open, if you were to prioritize this list, what order would you put them in? And I'll read them so that you can hear them. New worship space, 15 million or more. I made up that number. But a new worship space, either an expanded church or a new church, $15 million. Retirement of the debt. I know that that's actually $2.2 million. Roof replacements, this building, the church building, other buildings, I'm going to guess $400,000, but I don't really know. Ecological upgrades, so maybe geothermal heating, solar panels, EV charging stations. I guessed $200,000 on ecological upgrades, all right? Now I'm going out of order, so give me a minute. Hold on. Pipe organ, we know that our pipe organ needs to either be redone completely or at least expanded. And so I'm going to guess that that's about $200,000. The dishwasher in the kitchen, which is about $50,000, is near its last leg. Also, our beloved espresso machine is out. So I'm going to guess about $100,000 worth of kitchen repairs that need to be done. And then there was another $100,000 grounds improvements, hardscape, lighting, flower beds, sidewalks to make the place more beautiful. And then other, which would be whatever you would tell us. I don't know what you have in mind, but what else? So if you're going to prioritize these, and you can tell that they're shifting, and I love the way they're shifting, but take a minute, if you will, and respond to the survey and let us see what you would name as our first priority. If you were raising money, what would you name? And if you don't have a smart device, tell me what your first priority is. What would your first priority be? Debt retirement, roof replacements, kitchen repair, ground? What would you say? Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we do. Yeah. Yeah, we replaced some of the flat roofs that needed to be replaced, but we know that the roof over the church, we know that the roof over this space, we know that the roof over the hallway by the Guildhall roof. Yep. Yeah, sure. So if you don't have a smart device, tell me what your first priority would be. Jerry, here comes the microphone. Tell us what your first priority would be.
Debt retirement.
Debt retirement. Raise your hand if you're willing to say, raise your hand if debt retirement is your first priority. Yeah? Okay? All right. Who else wants to share their first priority that isn't debt retirement? Yeah, Barry. Barry, did you want to say? No, Barry's got it. Yeah, Sarah and then Ray. And keep responding online. The online is not closed yet, so respond if you will.
Yeah, I put roof replacements.
Yep.
Because water will just crumble the whole place eventually.
Yep, thank you. So deferred maintenance in order to avoid an even more expensive repair. Yep, and Ray, you've got?
The roof, then debt.
Roof and then debt? Yeah, both of which are strategic financial decisions, right? It's not because we all love roofs. And it's not because people say, I'm going to go to that church because their roof looks really nice. But we realize that those things have the ability to impinge upon the other ministries that we do, right? Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else have a different first choice that you want to share with us so that we can hear it? Tiffany? Yeah, Tiffany, tell us what you had. I'm going to be late to church, which is a problem, but that's okay. I'm having fun. Anyway, yeah.
I couldn't put them together, but I would have said the roof and the kitchen.
Yeah, roof and kitchen. Yeah.
Together.
For the same sort of reason. Yeah. All right. Last question, and this is where we'll finish. When should we start? When should we start a capital campaign? Right? When should we start it? Right away? Within a year? 1 to 2 years? 3 to 5 years? Or don't do that for 3 to 5 years. So if you've got a smart device, answer your report. And if you don't have a smart device, raise your hand and let us know. Jerry, what's your answer?
That would be ASAP.
ASAP. Yeah.
ASAP.
ASAP. Yeah. Ray? ASAP. Yep. Ray? What else? So let me as we finish, keep answering. Part of the challenge has been it's hard to raise a lot of money for something people aren't excited about. And I often have used sort of the language of what's got the real appeal, what's the attractive piece that we could do. People love kitchens. It's like your kitchen and bathroom. Everybody loves to do kitchen and bathroom remodel. Nobody likes to do wiring. Nobody wants to pay to upgrade wiring, but sometimes you got to do it, right? So, outreach space, children's space, beautiful space, worship space, even pipe organs. People get excited about that. Retiring debt, nobody gets excited about that. New dishwashers, maybe a little bit. Plumbing, ugh. So what I'm hearing from you, though, is y'all are able to make the connection. Y'all are able to see the connection between the importance of these capital improvements, including debt retirement, delayed maintenance issues, and the long-term life and health of the church, which is how we do that. I also want to say I'm grateful to the Bassett Discernment Group, who has reported in this space to us, that they've done some really good work and engaged us in dreaming about how we're going to use that space, not only how we're going to pay for it, but how could we use it, whether it's to be a landlord and to rent it, or to use that space for the ministries of the church, which is clearly what y'all have expressed to us. I love making that connection, and hearing this helps me in the vestry know, I think we might be ready to talk about that. All right, closing questions or comments. Jerry's got a closing comment or question. Yes, sir. Here comes that microphone. Yes, sir.
I think it would be very helpful for people to know that the only thing the church has been paying on its debt is the interest, and none of the principal has been paid. So the issue of the campaign should be simply paying off the loan,
Yeah, thank you.
and that people can understand.
Yeah, the one correction I'll say is we have made some principal payments, but not out of the budget, but out of some special gifts and some surplus money. So, but not a lot of it. So a little bit. Yes, Ray.
In one of her books on mysticism, Evelyn Underhill talks about how in her personal house, she wants to have her house be a place where she can experience the presence of God. She said it's very important to clean up your house and do good housekeeping.
Yeah.
So if you want to pitch this to people, you might want to pitch some of these less exciting items as just part of having a household that's well managed and making that a connection to the divine force.
And being able to quote Evelyn Underhill is a great gift to making that campaign in this place. All right. Thank y'all. Obviously, the conversation's not finished. I appreciate it. Keep the conversation going. Thank y'all very much. Good to be with you. Thanks, Dean.